Point at something. Actually do it. Lift your hand, extend one finger, aim it at an object across the room. It takes about half a second, and you have done it 10,000 times without ever thinking about it. You have just performed something that almost nothing else on this planet does. A wild chimpanzee does not do that, not for another chimpanzee. They can be taught to do it for a human handler in captivity, and they will point at food they want. But the thing you just did, aiming attention at an object for no reason except that another mind should look at it, is close to unique. And here is the part that reorders the question. You could do it before you could talk. Human infants start pointing at around 9 to 12 months old, months before their first word. The pointing is not a substitute for language. The pointing comes first, and language arrives afterwards and builds on top of it. Which means the question everyone asks about our ancestors is slightly wrong. People imagine a world before language as a silent one. Grunts. Frustration, meaning trapped inside skulls with no way out. That is not what it was. Before there was a single word, there was an enormous amount of communication going on. It was rich, it was precise, and quite a lot of it is still running inside you right now, underneath the words, doing work you never notice. This video is about what that system was, how we know, and the extraordinary fact that we have actually watched a language be born from it, in real time, within living memory. Let's start with what our closest relatives are doing, because it is not what most people assume. If you ask someone how chimpanzees communicate, they will usually say something about hooting or screaming. Vocalization. Noise. That is real, but it is the less interesting half. Because when researchers spent years following wild chimpanzee communities and cataloging what they actually do to influence each other, the vocal calls turned out to be limited and largely involuntary. A chimpanzee alarm call is closer to a reflex than a sentence. It goes off. The hands are a completely different story. Catherine Hobader and Richard Byrne spent years documenting the gestures of wild chimpanzees in Uganda, recording thousands of instances and working out which ones were used intentionally and what results they produced. Their catalog runs to around 60 to 80 distinct gestures. Not reflexes, deliberate acts, with meanings. A specific arm raise means one thing. A ground slap means another. A particular way of touching another chimpanzee's back means climb on. And you can tell they are intentional because of how the animals use them. A chimpanzee will check that the other one is looking before gesturing. If there is no response, they will repeat it. If there is still no response, they will switch to a different gesture that has the same goal. That sequence, attempt, persist, substitute, is the signature of a deliberate communicative act rather than an automatic one. Chimpanzees have far more voluntary control over their hands than over their voices. And that fact sits at the heart of one of the major hypotheses about how we got here. It is called gesture first, and the argument is straightforward. If our ancestors were going to build a communication system, they would build it out of the channel they could already control. And that channel was not the throat. It was the hands. Now, that is a hypothesis, and I want to be honest that it is argued over. There are researchers who think vocal and gestural communication developed together rather than one before the other, and the fossil record does not settle it because gestures do not fossilize. But there is a piece of evidence for the gesture argument that I find genuinely difficult to shake, and it was published in 2023. A research team wanted to know whether human beings could understand ape gestures without being taught them. Not chimpanzees who had lived with humans, not trained animals. Wild ape gestures, shown as video clips, to ordinary adults who had never studied primatology. Over 5,000 people took part online. They watched clips of chimpanzees and bonobos gesturing, and were asked to choose the correct meaning from a set of options. They got it right well above chance. Consistently, across many different gestures. People who had never seen a wild chimpanzee in their lives could look at an ape gesture and work out roughly what it meant. Think about what that implies. It suggests the gestural repertoire is not something chimpanzees invented for themselves, and we invented separately. It suggests it is shared, inherited from a common ancestor, still legible on both sides of a split that happened 6 or 7 million years ago. You already speak some of it. You have simply never been asked to notice. So if the hands were already working and the meanings were already there, what changed? Why are we the ones sitting here with grammar? The answer is not a bigger vocabulary. It is something that has to happen before vocabulary is even possible. And it comes back to the thing you did at the start of this video. Go back to the point. To point at something and have it work, an enormous amount has to already be in place. You have to understand that the other individual has a mind. You have to understand that their attention is somewhere, and that it is somewhere different from yours. You have to want to move their attention, and they have to understand that you want that, that your finger is not the interesting thing, and that they should look past it to what it indicates. Dogs can follow a point, which is remarkable in itself, and which we covered in another video. But dogs are not doing the other half. A dog does not point at something to share it with you. It has no interest in your attention as a thing to be directed. Human infants do this before they can speak, and crucially, they do a version of it that has no practical purpose at all. Developmental researchers distinguish between two kinds of pointing. Imperative pointing means I want that, get it for me. Plenty of animals can learn this. Declarative pointing means look at that, I want you to see it too. There is no object obtained, no need met. The only outcome is that two minds are now aimed at the same thing at the same time, and both know it. Joint attention. And the developmental psychologist Michael Tomasello has argued, across decades of comparative work, that it is the foundation everything else is built on. Because a word only functions if joint attention already exists. Imagine trying to teach someone a word from scratch with no shared attention. You make a sound, they have no idea what you are labeling, so the sequence has to be: first, the ability to share attention deliberately. Language is the software, and there is a piece of physical evidence for this that is sitting in your face right now. Look at another person's eyes, and you can tell exactly where they are looking. Left, right, up. You do this constantly and effortlessly, and you have never once thought of it as a skill. Now go and look at a photograph of a chimpanzee's eye, or a gorilla's, or almost any other primate. You cannot tell. Humans are the only primate with a bright white sclera, and makes the gaze direction even easier to read. Researchers Hiromi Kobayashi and Shiro Koshima documented this comparison across dozens of primate species. We have eyes that broadcast it. Sit with how strange that is. Concealing your gaze is useful. We gave it up. Your eyes were redesigned to make your attention public, and this one is the closest to actual speech, once with real irritation. Same word, for completely different messages, and every single person listening would decode all four correctly without effort. It is in the pitch, the length, the rise and fall, the loudness. Linguists call it prosody. You can be dropped into a country whose language you do not speak a word of. The range stretches out into exaggerated swoops, and nobody decides to do it. Infants prefer it and pay more attention to it than to ordinary adult speech. That, I think, is one of the more elegant ideas in the field. A monkey infant clings. It has the grip strength and the fur to hold on, and its mother has both hands free while it does. And our mothers walk upright with hands that are needed for carrying other things. And a human infant put down on the ground, out of physical contact, in a landscape with predators, is a screaming emergency. So the mother has to do something she cannot do with her hands, because her hands are busy. She has to reassure the infant from a distance, with her voice, not to convey information. To convey I am still here, you are safe, calm down. Across a gap of a few meters, using nothing but tone. Whether the specific story is right is debated. We have a vocal system that carries emotional meaning without carrying any words at all. It is universal, which leads to an idea that Darwin proposed in 1871, and that has been revived and developed since, most prominently by the archaeologist Stephen Mithen. Not song in the modern sense. Something holistic, long, melodic, rhythmic utterances, where the whole sequence carried a meaning rather than being built out of separable parts. Those holistic utterances start being broken apart. Somebody notices that a fragment of one sequence keeps recurring in situations involving a particular thing. That fragment gets peeled off and reused. You have crossed the line into something you would recognize as language. That is a hypothesis, and I want to be clear, it is not a finding. Nobody has a fossil of a song, but the pieces of it are all still in you. You have prosody that works without words. You have music that carries meaning without vocabulary. You have infant-directed speech that is closer to melody than to sentences. All of that is real, present, and functioning. Now here is where the story turns, because you might reasonably be thinking that all of this is unfalsifiable. Gestures do not fossilize. Prosody does not fossilize. We are reconstructing a soundless past, from indirect evidence and modern comparisons, except that we have watched it happen. Not a reconstruction, not a model, an actual language, coming into existence, documented by linguists as it occurred, within the last 50 years, isolated in hearing families, and there was no national sign language for them to learn. Then, after the revolution, the government opened schools. Deaf children were brought together in numbers for the first time. But out on the playground, and on the buses, something else was happening. The children pooled their homemade gestures. And what emerged was not a jumble. Rules about ordering, ways of marking who did what to whom. And the younger children did not simply copy it. They regularized it. They made it more systematic, more grammatical, more efficient than the version they had been given. They broke complex movements into separate components that could be recombined, which is exactly the shift from holistic to compositional that the theories predict. The younger the child, the more sophisticated their grammar, even though their input was less sophisticated. Linguists were able to observe all of this, record it, and analyze it as it developed. No adult taught it. It was not derived from Spanish or from any existing sign language. In about 2 decades, developed its own sign language independently over a few generations. There is also a smaller and quieter version of the same phenomenon. Deaf children born to hearing parents with no sign language exposure do not simply fail to communicate. Consistent ordering, distinctions that function like the difference between nouns and verbs. Ways of marking things that are not present. What all of this tells us about our ancestors is not the specific content. Nobody is claiming Paleolithic humans invented Nicaraguan Sign Language. What it tells us is about the pressure. Put minds together that can share attention. Give them a reason to coordinate, and something structured emerges. The children in Managua did it in 2 generations, which reframes the entire question of how long language took. The bottleneck was probably never the invention of communication. Our ancestors had gesture, gaze, prosody, and shared attention, and those are the difficult parts. The bottleneck was whatever finally allowed the vocal channel to carry the load the hands were already carrying. And the moment it could, the rest may have arrived faster than anyone assumed. You are going to have a conversation today, and you will think of it as an exchange of words. It will not be. Watch what actually happens. You will glance at an object to draw the other person's eyes to it, and it will work. You will hear irritation in a voice that is saying something perfectly polite. The words are riding on top of a system that was already complete. Can still get you to a train station in about 90 seconds. You have not lost anything. You have just stopped noticing that you were using it. Before you go, I want to ask you something specific. Have you ever had a real conversation, not tourist phrases, an actual exchange where something got across? Where were you, and how did you manage it? Tell me in the comments, because I suspect the answers are going to sound a lot like what our ancestors were doing. We did not invent communication when we invented words. We just finally found a way to do it in the dark.